You are about to dive into a world where the inexplicable becomes reality and fear lurks in the shadows. Prepare to face the darkest mysteries and the most terrifying enigmas. Each story you will hear is a suspenseful tale, full of terror and secrets that defy reason. Before we begin, don't forget to leave your like if you love mystery and horror stories, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. Turn on the bell to receive notifications and always be up to date with the most intriguing and scary tales. Are you ready to face the unknown? Then keep watching and prepare yourself for an experience that will make your heart beat faster and your mind question what is real. Let's begin our journey. In the desolate mountains of Rosedale, there stood an ancient and eerie necropolis known only to the locals as the Whispering Vault. The place had been abandoned for decades, its darkened halls and empty crypts a silent witness to the passage of time and the decay of forgotten souls. The residents of the nearby village spoke of the necropolis in hushed tones, often warning outsiders to steer clear, especially after dusk. No one truly understood why the place was so feared, but the villagers believed it was cursed, haunted by those who had been buried there. George, an elderly caretaker with a solemn demeanor, had worked alone in the necropolis for over 20 years. His job was to ensure the crypts remained undisturbed and the peace of the dead preserved. He knew every inch of the cold stone corridors and every creaking door, having walked them countless times. However, the loneliness and darkness were starting to weigh on him. It was during one of these long, dreary nights that the first unusual occurrence happened. One evening, as George made his routine rounds, he noticed an unsettling chill in the air. The usual silence of the necropolis seemed to be replaced by a soft, rhythmic whispering that he couldn't quite place. It was faint at first, like the rustling of dry leaves or the distant murmur of a brook. But as he moved deeper into the crypts, the whispering grew louder, more distinct, as if someone, or something, was trying to speak. George approached the source of the sound, an old mausoleum that had been sealed for years. The whispers seemed to emanate from within. With a trembling hand, he pried open the heavy, dust-covered door. The interior was dark and filled with stale air. The whispers abruptly stopped. George's flashlight flickered nervously as he scanned the room. To his shock, he discovered that one of the sarcophagi was slightly ajar, its cover partially moved aside. This was impossible. He had checked this particular crypt only a week before, and it had been sealed. George's heart raced as he approached the open sarcophagus. Inside, he found a body that seemed disturbingly fresh, the face not yet fully decayed. The eyes were wide open, staring directly at him with a look of horror. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the mausoleum, extinguishing George's flashlight. The whispers returned, louder and more frantic. The voices were now unmistakable, pleading and desperate. George fumbled in the darkness, trying to relight his flashlight, but the eerie feeling of being watched grew stronger. The whispers grew into anguished cries, and the temperature in the room plummeted. George felt an oppressive weight on his chest, as though invisible hands were trying to drag him down into the sarcophagus. He heard footsteps approaching, though he saw no one. The darkness seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. Panicking, George stumbled out of the mausoleum, but the necropolis had changed. The once familiar corridors now twisted and turned in impossible angles. The walls seemed to close in on him, and every door he tried was locked or blocked. The whispers grew louder, merging into a cacophony of screams and cries. George's breaths came in ragged gasps as he realized he was lost. As the night wore on, George's flashlight flickered out for good. The necropolis was now shrouded in complete darkness. Shadows moved on their own, and spectral figures began to appear, their forms half seen and shifting. George felt them closing in, their icy fingers grazing his skin, making him shiver uncontrollably. In the depth of his fear, George stumbled into a hidden chamber he had never seen before. It was filled with strange symbols and ancient relics, a place that seemed to have been untouched for centuries. On a pedestal in the center of the room lay an old, dusty book. George, driven by a mixture of terror and curiosity, opened the book. The pages were filled with rituals and incantations, warning of an ancient curse placed upon the necropolis to trap the souls of the dead. As he read, the chamber was filled with a blinding light, and George felt himself being pulled into the air. He could see the spirits of the dead swirling around him, their faces contorted in eternal torment. They reached out to him, their hands passing through him, their cries echoing in his mind. Desperately, George tried to close the book, but the words seemed to come alive, wrapping around him, drawing him deeper into their cursed narrative. The room spun violently, and George felt himself being consumed by the darkness. The next morning, the villagers discovered the necropolis's main door wide open. They called out for George, but found no trace of him. The mausoleum where the strange events had occurred was sealed once more, and the villagers, terrified, vowed never to enter the necropolis again. To this day, the whispers can still be heard at night, a chilling reminder of the last visit of George, who is now believed to be another lost soul, forever trapped within the cursed halls of the Whispering Vault. In the sprawling metropolis of Crestwood, an old necropolis lay hidden away from the bustling city life. This necropolis was known for its somber air and dark secrets, a place where the departed were left to rest in eternal silence. But beneath its solemn facade, something far more sinister lurked. The necropolis had recently fallen into the hands of a new director, Dr. Victor Lang, a man renowned for his meticulous work, but also rumored to be deeply intrigued by the occult. As part of his new role, Dr. Lang embarked on a comprehensive audit of the necropolis's records. His objective was to ensure that all burial documentation was in order, and that no discrepancies existed. On a chilly autumn evening, with the sun setting in hues of crimson and gold, Dr. Lang and his assistant Emily descended into the dimly lit archives beneath the necropolis. The archives were a labyrinth of musty corridors and high shelves laden with dusty files and ancient ledgers. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and the faintest hint of decay. Dr. Lang meticulously combed through the records, noting various discrepancies and oddities. Among the stacks of dusty files, he discovered an old, leather-bound ledger, its cover worn and cracked with age. The ledger was hidden behind a false wall panel, as if someone had deliberately concealed it. Curious, Dr. Lang opened the ledger and began to read. The entries were dated over a century ago and detailed a series of deaths that seemed peculiar and unsettling. They described individuals who had perished under mysterious circumstances, their bodies buried with strange symbols and arcane rituals. What caught Dr. Lang's attention was the mention of an experiment involving forbidden rites and the reanimation of the dead. The more Dr. Lang read, the more he was drawn into the unsettling narrative. The ledger spoke of a secret society that had conducted these experiments, seeking to harness dark powers and commune with otherworldly entities. Each entry detailed increasingly disturbing rituals, with some suggesting that the dead were being used as vessels for these dark forces. As the night deepened, the atmosphere in the archive grew colder, and Emily noticed an unusual chill in the air. She observed Dr. Lang becoming increasingly absorbed in the ledger, his face illuminated by the flickering light of a single lamp. Shadows seemed to dance around the room, and strange noises echoed through the corridors. Whispers, footsteps, and an occasional moan that seemed almost too real. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the archives, extinguishing the lamp and plunging them into darkness. Emily's flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows across the walls. She heard Dr. Lang muttering to himself, his voice filled with a mix of fascination and fear. Desperate to understand what was happening, Emily tried to get his attention, but he seemed oblivious to her presence. In the dim glow of the flashlight, Emily saw dark, amorphous shapes moving across the walls, shadows that seemed to writhe and pulse with a life of their own. As she reached out to shake Dr. Lang, he turned to her with eyes wide and glassy, as if he had seen something beyond comprehension. He pointed to a passage in the ledger describing a final, terrifying ritual. The ritual, according to the ledger, involved summoning an entity that could bind the souls of the dead to the necropolis, trapping them in a perpetual state of unrest. The passage ended with a chilling warning. Those who seek to uncover these truths shall become part of the darkness they strive to reveal. Suddenly, the temperature plummeted, and a deep, resonant voice filled the room, speaking in a language Emily could not understand. The shadows converged on them, forming grotesque figures with hollow eyes and gaping mouths. The entities seemed to materialize from the very darkness, their presence oppressive and terrifying. Emily felt an icy grip on her arm, pulling her towards the shadows. Dr. Lang, in a trance-like state, began to recite the incantations from the ledger, his voice merging with the eerie chant of the shadows. Emily's heart raced as she tried to pull away, but the shadows closed in, their forms becoming more defined and menacing. Desperate, she grabbed the ledger and threw it across the room. The figures recoiled, their forms flickering and fading, but not before one of them reached out and touched her arm, leaving a cold, burning sensation. In a moment of sheer panic, Emily fled from the archives, her screams echoing through the dark corridors. Behind her, the shadows seemed to pursue her, their whispers growing louder, filled with anger and frustration. She burst out of the necropolis, gasping for breath, but when she looked back, the entrance had vanished. It was as if the necropolis itself had swallowed the horrors within. The next morning, the necropolis was found eerily quiet, and Dr. Lang was missing. The ledger was gone, and the archives had been meticulously cleaned, as if no disturbance had ever occurred. Emily tried to tell her story, but no one believed her. The necropolis remained shrouded in secrecy, with rumors spreading about the mysterious disappearance of Dr. Lang and the strange occurrences that had plagued the archives. To this day, the necropolis stands as a dark testament to the forbidden knowledge it once held. Locals speak of shadowy figures seen moving through the archives, and the unsettling whispers that can sometimes be heard if one listens closely. The truth of what happened that night remains a chilling mystery, with Dr. Lang's fate and the sinister secrets of the ledger lost to the darkness of the necropolis. Oakwood Farm had always been a place of rustic charm, nestled in a remote corner of the countryside. Its picturesque fields and tranquil setting belied the dark history that lay buried beneath its surface. The farm had been in the Harrison family for generations, and with each passing decade, whispers of its eerie past grew louder. Local legends spoke of strange occurrences and unsettling experiences that plagued the property, but none were as chilling as what unfolded one fateful autumn. It was during a particularly harsh winter that the farm's caretaker, Samuel Harrison, decided to renovate the old family necropolis. The small, dilapidated building had long been an afterthought, its crumbling walls and rotting timbers a stark contrast to the well-maintained farmhouse. Samuel, determined to honor his family's legacy and bring the necropolis back to its former glory, began work with a small crew of workers. As they cleared the debris and began structural repairs, they uncovered an old trapdoor hidden beneath the floorboards. Samuel, intrigued and somewhat apprehensive, had it pried open to reveal a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Ignoring the unease that settled over him, he decided to explore the hidden chamber below. The staircase creaked ominously as Samuel descended, the air growing colder with each step. At the bottom, he found a small, musty room lined with old wooden shelves. On these shelves, there were several ancient jars filled with murky liquid, their contents undistinguishable. In the center of the room stood a large, ornately carved chest, its surface covered in strange symbols and runes. Samuel approached the chest with a mix of curiosity and dread. The lock was rusted but gave way easily under his pressure. As he opened the chest, he was met with a cloud of dust and a pungent odor that made him gag. Inside, there were several old documents and faded photographs. One photograph caught Samuel's eye, a black and white image of a family standing in front of the very necropolis he was renovating. The family's expressions were solemn, and their eyes seemed to follow him with an unsettling intensity. Samuel's curiosity turned to concern when he noticed a journal among the documents. It belonged to a long-deceased ancestor named Elijah Harrison, who had been deeply involved in the occult. The journal detailed forbidden rituals and experiments conducted in the necropolis, aiming to communicate with the dead and harness their spirits for unknown purposes. That night, Samuel couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Strange noises echoed through the necropolis, scratches, whispers, and the occasional faint cry. As he lay in bed, he heard the distinct sound of footsteps pacing in the upper room of the farmhouse. When he investigated, he found nothing amiss, but a cold draft seemed to follow him wherever he went. The renovations continued, but the eerie occurrences intensified. Workers reported seeing shadowy figures moving through the necropolis, and some claimed they felt invisible hands touching them. The farm's animals grew agitated and refused to go near the necropolis, their behavior becoming increasingly erratic. Samuel's once proud renovation project had become a source of growing fear and anxiety. One particularly stormy night, as lightning illuminated the sky in violent flashes, Samuel and his crew were working late into the evening. The wind howled through the cracks in the necropolis walls, and the sound of rain beating against the roof created a rhythmic pounding that added to the sense of foreboding. Suddenly, the power went out, plunging the necropolis into complete darkness. Samuel's flashlight flickered uncertainly as he searched for the source of the outage. As he moved through the darkened hallways, he began to hear a soft, sorrowful wail coming from the hidden chamber below. The sound was both mournful and terrifying, growing louder with each step he took. With trembling hands, Samuel descended the stairs once more. In the dim beam of his flashlight, the room looked different. The shelves were overturned, and the jars were shattered, their contents pooling on the floor. The chest was open, and the documents scattered. The journal had vanished. As Samuel stepped further into the room, he felt a sudden chill and saw a ghostly figure emerge from the shadows. The figure was that of a woman, dressed in old-fashioned mourning clothes, her face pale and her eyes hollow. She drifted toward Samuel, her presence exuding an unbearable sadness. As she drew closer, Samuel could hear her whispering incoherent phrases, her voice blending with the sorrowful wail that filled the room. Terrified, Samuel tried to back away, but the temperature dropped dramatically, and the air became thick and oppressive. The ghostly woman reached out towards him, her hand extending as if trying to grasp something unseen. Samuel's flashlight went out, leaving him in complete darkness. He could feel the cold touch of her spectral hand grazing his skin, sending shivers through his entire body. Desperate to escape, Samuel ran up the stairs, stumbling through the darkened necropolis. As he burst into the farmhouse, he found the storm outside had grown even more violent, the wind howling with an almost supernatural fury. He slammed the door behind him and locked it, but the pounding on the walls and the anguished cries continued, echoing through the house. That night, Samuel had no choice but to abandon the necropolis. He packed what belongings he could and left Oakwood Farm, never to return. The necropolis remained abandoned, its dark history a chilling reminder of the forbidden practices that had once taken place within its walls. Locals continued to speak of the haunting cries and shadowy figures seen near the old building, and the farm became a place of whispered legends and ghostly tales. To this day, Oakwood Farm stands as a silent witness to the horrors that lie buried within its necropolis. Visitors who dare to approach the abandoned building often report strange occurrences, cold spots, eerie whispers, and fleeting glimpses of ghostly figures. The legacy of Elijah Harrison's dark experiments lives on, casting a long, ominous shadow over the once peaceful farm. Deep in the heart of the forgotten countryside, surrounded by twisted oaks and dense, unyielding fog, lay an old, forsaken necropolis, known only to the locals as the Whispering Tomb. This necropolis had a sinister reputation, shrouded in mystery and fear. Its tombs and mausoleums, long abandoned, were rumored to be the resting place of ancient and malevolent spirits. Few dared to venture near, and those who did often spoke of strange occurrences and chilling encounters. The story begins with a young historian named Sarah Mitchell, renowned for her fascination with ancient burial rites and lost civilizations. When Sarah uncovered references to the Whispering Tomb in some obscure manuscripts, her curiosity was piqued. Despite warnings from colleagues and locals about the necropolis's dark history, Sarah was determined to investigate. She believed that the necropolis held secrets that could rewrite history and shed light on ancient practices that had been lost to time. Arriving at the necropolis in the dead of night, Sarah was met with an unsettling silence that seemed to swallow the sounds of her footsteps. The moon cast eerie shadows across the decaying stone structures, and the air was thick with the smell of damp earth and mildew. She made her way through the labyrinthine paths, guided only by the flickering light of her lantern and the occasional rustle of leaves disturbed by the wind. The entrance to the main mausoleum was partially obscured by overgrown ivy and twisted branches. With some effort, Sarah managed to clear the entrance and push open the heavy iron door. The mausoleum's interior was cold and musty, filled with the remnants of forgotten rituals and neglected relics. Dust motes floated in the beam of her lantern as she carefully examined her surroundings. As Sarah explored deeper into the mausoleum, she came across a series of intricate carvings on the walls. They depicted scenes of strange ceremonies and figures performing dark rites, their faces obscured by shadow. The carvings seemed to come alive in the flickering light, their eyes following Sarah as she moved. In the center of the mausoleum lay a large, ornate sarcophagus. Its lid was covered in ancient symbols and runes, some of which Sarah recognized from her research as being associated with necromancy and spirit summoning. Her heart raced with excitement and fear as she examined the sarcophagus, feeling an overwhelming sense of foreboding. With great effort, Sarah managed to pry open the sarcophagus lid. Inside, she found a desiccated body dressed in tattered robes, its features obscured by the ravages of time. However, what drew her attention was an old leather-bound book lying beside the corpse. The book was inscribed with more runes and symbols, and its pages were filled with cryptic texts and detailed illustrations of dark rituals. As Sarah began to examine the book, she felt a sudden oppressive weight in the air. The temperature dropped drastically, and a deep, resonant whisper seemed to echo through the mausoleum. The whispers grew louder, merging into a chorus of disembodied voices, their tones both pleading and menacing. Unnerved but determined, Sarah continued to read the book. It spoke of a ritual to summon a powerful entity from beyond the grave, one that could grant immense power but at a terrible cost. The ritual required the sacrifice of a living soul and the binding of the entity to a physical vessel. Sarah's hands trembled as she read, realizing that the necropolis had been the site of such dark ceremonies. Suddenly, the whispers coalesced into a single chilling voice that spoke directly into Sarah's mind. It was a voice filled with ancient malice and sorrow, promising to reveal the secrets of the universe if she completed the ritual. The temperature in the mausoleum plummeted even further, and Sarah could see her breath misting in the cold air. Panicked, Sarah tried to close the book, but it seemed to resist her efforts. The pages fluttered wildly, and the whispers became an angry roar. Shadows on the walls began to move, forming grotesque shapes that reached out towards her. The mausoleum's interior seemed to distort and warp, the walls bending and stretching in impossible ways. Desperate to escape, Sarah fled the mausoleum, but the path back was no longer familiar. The once straight corridors had twisted into a nightmarish maze, the stone walls pulsating with a dark, unearthly light. The shadows seemed to pursue her, their whispers growing louder and more insistent. She stumbled through the necropolis, her lantern swinging wildly as she tried to find her way out. Just as she thought she had found an exit, she was confronted by a spectral figure, a ghostly apparition with hollow eyes and a mournful expression. The figure reached out towards her, its hand passing through the air as if trying to grasp something unseen. The entity's presence was overwhelming, its sorrow and rage palpable. Sarah ran, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the entity's mournful cries echoing through the necropolis, and the whispers seemed to follow her every step. The darkness pressed in on her from all sides, and she felt an icy grip on her arm, dragging her back towards the mausoleum. In a final, desperate attempt to escape, Sarah threw the book aside and sprinted towards what she hoped was the entrance. She burst out of the necropolis, gasping for breath as she reached the safety of the outside world. Behind her, the necropolis seemed to close up. the shadows retreating and the whispers fading into silence. Sarah never returned to the Whispering Tomb. She left the countryside, her experience haunting her dreams and thoughts. The necropolis remained a place of fear and legend, its dark secrets buried beneath the decaying stone. Locals continued to speak of strange occurrences and ghostly figures seen near the old mausoleum. The whispers, they said, still echoed through the night, a reminder of the forbidden knowledge and dark entities that lay hidden within the Whispering Tomb. In a remote, uncharted valley surrounded by jagged cliffs and dense forests, lay an ancient and forgotten crypt, known only to a few as the Forgotten Crypt. The crypt, shrouded in legend and mystery, had been buried under centuries of neglect, its existence known only through cryptic local folklore. Few had ventured near, and those who did often returned with unsettling tales of supernatural horrors. The tale begins with Dr. Emily Carter, an esteemed archaeologist specializing in ancient civilizations and lost relics. Her career had been built on unearthing secrets that had long been buried, but her latest discovery promised to be her most significant find yet. After deciphering an old manuscript that hinted at the location of the Forgotten Crypt, Emily was determined to investigate. Despite the ominous warnings from her colleagues and local legends of a curse, her curiosity and professional drive overshadowed her fears. Emily and her small team of researchers arrived at the valley as twilight descended. The landscape was both breathtaking and foreboding. Tall, gnarled trees cast long shadows over the rugged terrain, and a chilling wind howled through the canyon. They followed an ancient map that led them to the entrance of the crypt, partially obscured by vines and debris. With some effort, they cleared the entrance and pushed open the heavy stone door, which groaned in protest. The interior of the crypt was a labyrinth of narrow, winding corridors and dimly lit chambers. The air was thick with the musty smell of decay, and the walls were adorned with faded frescoes depicting scenes of ancient rituals and offerings to unknown deities. Emily's lantern cast eerie shadows that danced along the walls, creating the illusion of movement in the dark. As they ventured deeper into the crypt, they stumbled upon a large chamber at the heart of the structure. In the center of the room stood a massive stone sarcophagus, intricately carved with symbols and runes that Emily recognized from her research. The sarcophagus was adorned with a series of grotesque faces, their eyes hollow and empty, staring out from the stone. Emily's team began to examine the sarcophagus, their excitement palpable. They carefully pried open the lid, revealing an ancient skeleton lying within. However, it was not the skeleton that drew their attention, but rather a strange, ornate box nestled beside the corpse. The box was covered in intricate designs and strange symbols, its surface shimmering with an otherworldly light. With a mix of anticipation and apprehension, Emily opened the box. Inside was a collection of ancient artifacts, ornate jewelry, ceremonial daggers, and a collection of old scrolls. One scroll in particular stood out. It was bound in dark leather and covered in symbols that seemed to pulse with a faint, eerie glow. As Emily unrolled the scroll, she felt a sudden, oppressive chill. The air grew colder, and a sense of unease settled over the chamber. The scroll detailed a forbidden ritual, a summoning of a powerful entity from beyond the grave. The ritual required specific incantations and the offering of a human soul, binding the entity to the mortal realm. Before Emily could fully comprehend the implications of the scroll, the atmosphere in the crypt began to change. The temperature dropped drastically, and an unsettling silence fell over the chamber. Shadows on the walls seemed to shift and writhe, and a deep, resonant whisper filled the air. The whispers grew louder, forming coherent phrases that spoke of ancient curses and dark promises. Emily and her team tried to leave the chamber, but the crypt's layout had changed. The corridors twisted and turned in impossible ways, and the entrance they had used was nowhere to be found. Panic set in as they realized they were trapped. The whispers grew more insistent, and the shadows seemed to take on a more tangible form. One of Emily's colleagues, a seasoned archaeologist named Mark, attempted to force open a door. But as he did, a chilling apparition materialized before them. The ghostly figure was clad in ancient robes, its face a featureless void. It hovered menacingly, its presence exuding an overwhelming sense of dread. The apparition spoke in a hollow voice, recounting the dark history of the forgotten crypt. It told of an ancient cult that had used the crypt for their dark rituals, summoning entities from beyond to gain power and immortality. The cult had been cursed, their souls trapped in the crypt for eternity, condemned to wander the dark corridors as tormented spirits. As the apparition spoke, the crypt seemed to come alive with malevolent energy. The walls began to crack and bleed, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. The air was filled with the sound of anguished wails and ghostly whispers, and the temperature plummeted to near freezing. Desperate to escape, Emily and her team tried to follow the shifting corridors, but they only found themselves deeper within the crypt. The shadows grew more aggressive, reaching out with ghostly hands that seemed to claw at their flesh. The whispers turned into a cacophony of screams and curses, and the apparition continued to pursue them, its presence growing more threatening with each passing moment. In a final, desperate attempt to escape, Emily grabbed the scroll and attempted to destroy it. She hoped that by eliminating the source of the crypt's power, they might be able to break the curse and find a way out. As she set the scroll alight, the crypt erupted in a blaze of otherworldly light. The flames danced with an eerie, unnatural glow, and the walls began to collapse. The crypt's energy reached a crescendo, and the spirits trapped within began to wail in agony. Emily and her team, guided by the last remnants of their courage, fought their way through the crumbling passages. The exit was finally within sight, but as they neared it, the apparition lunged at them, its cold, spectral hands reaching for their throats. With one final burst of energy, Emily and her team emerged from the crypt just as it collapsed behind them. They tumbled out into the cool night air, gasping for breath and covered in dust. The crypt lay in ruins, its dark secrets buried once more beneath the rubble. Emily and her team never returned to the forgotten crypt. The experience left them shaken and haunted by the horrors they had witnessed. The crypt remained a place of dark legend, its cursed history a chilling reminder of the dangers that lay hidden in forgotten places. The valley where the crypt stood became a forbidden zone, its eerie silence a testament to the malevolent forces that still lurked beneath the surface. To this day, locals speak of strange occurrences and ghostly figures seen near the ruins of the forgotten crypt. The whispers of the trapped spirits continue to echo through the valley, a haunting reminder of the ancient curses and dark rituals that once took place within its walls. If you enjoyed these stories and want more content that will keep you up at night, don't forget to like and share this video with your friends. Your opinion is important to us, and your comments are always welcome. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, take the opportunity to subscribe now and activate the bell so you don't miss any of our next terrifying adventures. Stay tuned, because the mysteries of the world are far from over, and we'll be here to explore them with you. Until next time, and remember, the unknown is always lurking, waiting to reveal its darkest secrets.